Welcome to Lay's Little Golden Books. I hope you all enjoy today's story, and maybe the grown-ups will remember it from their own childhood. Walt Disney's Paul Revere by Erwin Shapiro, a little golden book originally from 1957. There was once a man named Paul Revere who rode under the midnight moon. He knew he might never return, but he went riding for liberty, because he wanted a country without a king, a country where all men could be free. Paul Revere was a silversmith in old Boston town. If anything could be made of silver, Paul Revere could make it. In his shop on Fish Street, he made teapots and cream pots, buckles and bowls, and spoons and jugs and cups. But on this April night he left his shop. He walked quickly through the streets, keeping away from the king's soldiers in their red coats. Robert Newman was waiting for him, almost hidden by the shadow of Christ Church. "The king's soldiers march tonight," Paul Revere said. "They want to capture our guns and gunpowder and some of our men. I am riding to Lexington to give the warning, but the redcoats may stop me. We are to tell our men with lanterns how the British go, 1 if by land and 2 if by sea." Robert Newman nodded. "I know the plan. I will show the lanterns from the tower of the church." "Show 2 lanterns. The redcoats are going by sea," said Paul Revere. While Robert Newman started up the tower, Paul Revere hurried home. He put on his boots and riding coat and said goodbye to his wife and children. "Good luck, father," said young Paul, his oldest son. "Thank you, son," Paul Revere said. "Now it's up to you to take care of things here, for there's no telling if I'll return." Once again, Paul Revere went out into the night. With 2 friends, he went to the river bank where he had hidden a rowboat. "My spurs," he said. "I've forgotten my spurs. How can I ride without them?" Then he saw that his dog had followed him. Writing a note to Mrs. Revere, he tied it to the dog. "Home, boy," he said. "Home as fast as you can." The dog was back in a few minutes, and tied around his neck were the spurs. "Ah, that's better," said Paul Revere. Getting into the boat, Paul Revere and his friends began to row across the river. Floating on the water was the ship Somerset. It was a big ship, the king's ship, and it had 64 cannons. Its lanterns shone out in the darkness like staring eyes. Paul Revere kept listening for the roar of cannon or the shout of a ship's officer, but he could hear nothing, and at last the boat touched shore. "We did it," Paul Revere said. "We did it, right under their noses." Not far from shore, Paul Revere met some men. They led him to Deacon Larkin's house and gave him a horse. "You must be careful, sir," said one of the men. "There are redcoats on the road." "I will," Paul Revere said as he got into the saddle. "Well, gentlemen, I must be off." And Paul Revere began riding for liberty. Past fields and meadows, past orchards and farms he rode. Brooks and streams flashed by in the moonlight, and in all the world there was no sound but the rush of wind and the thud of the horse's hoofs on the road. Then ahead of him he saw 2 men on horseback. Their pistols gleamed in the moonlight. "Soldiers," Paul Revere said. "Redcoats." One of the soldiers galloped toward him, and Paul Revere cut across a field. Near a swamp, he suddenly turned aside. He smiled as the horse behind him crashed into the swamp, its hoofs sinking in the mud. Spurring on his horse, Paul Revere raced to another road. Riding, he came to the village of Medford. He stopped at a house and pounded on the door. "Wake up," he shouted. "The redcoats are coming." At every house, all the way to Lexington, Paul Revere shouted his warning, "To arms! To arms! The redcoats are coming!" And everywhere, men reached for their rifles. They were Minutemen, ready to fight in a minute. Women ran to the swamps with their children. Church bells rang and drums rolled. For the redcoats were coming, and the time had come to fight for liberty. And when the redcoats marched into Lexington, the Minutemen were there before them. A shot was fired, and the battle started, and the battle was the start of a great war. For years the war went on, and when the war was over, there was a new country. the United States of America. It was a country without a king, where all men could be free. And Americans have never forgotten Paul Revere, who rode under the midnight moon, riding, riding, riding for liberty. The end.